Hi, I'm Scott Barry Kaufman from the Imagination Institute. At the Imagination Institute, we're dedicated to making progress on the growth, improvement, and measurement of imagination across all sectors of society. Toward that aim, we've been hosting a series of imagination retreats. These retreats consist of discussions with some of the world's most imaginative thinkers across a wide range of fields, from psychology to comedy to physics to spirituality, among others. We've had a lot of exciting discussions about how imagination operates within each field and how we can help young people develop imagination. We've also been discussing the importance of imagination in society more generally. What you're about to watch is edited footage of one of these imagination retreats. In addition, all the videos and reports of all the retreats will be available on our website at imagination-institute.org.
So we thought we might address the general question in this session of, are there downsides to being a polymath?
So yes and no. So no, because it actually fuels my creativity. I'm creative precisely because I am not worried about boundaries. I don't care about the boundaries. I don't look for boundaries. And if they're there and I find them, I disregard them. So that is a good positive. I see that in a positive light. In the negative light, yes, and this was something that kind of came up yesterday talking with Harvey, that, because he asked me, like after my postdoc, I could have, why not go into academia and what department would I fit in? And kind of this just came up with Rebecca. I was like, I don't even in my own department from cognitive science at Johns Hopkins, where I got my PhD, they look at me very, very weird. And there's a sort of rejection. There's a kind of rejection. And yet, when I've talked to people in the theater and film and writing world, they're like, why are you asking those crazy questions? Just focus on the characters and the narration. So I say, well, I could not fit in any academic department because I fit in, if not all, but many of them. And so in that side, that is a downside. And I think that's part of the argument I've been trying to make, that I think we need to just move past these defined boundaries that have been made across history and time. And in order to answer big questions, we need to break them apart, and people need to be far more open to this type of merging and transformation and mutation of disciplines. So, and I think that would be the positive aspect of leading to much better innovation.
There's two kinds of polymath as far as I can tell. I'm not sure which one you were thinking of inviting me for, but there's two kinds. One is where it's really separate and there's no obvious synergy. I say obvious because there might be some synergy you don't expect down the road. And the other is when it's fully integrated and it's nothing but synergy. So in my case, the math and philosophy, the mathematical and I'm going to say carefully, see, I'm from that culture. Mathematical and philosophical thinking is fully integrated, but those we know from from general experience that mathematical thinking seems to be quite different than philosophical thinking, enough so that there isn't a lot of people who really are very good at or even care about both sides. So that's a certain kind of polymathism that I was supposed to exhibit, okay? And there, I gain a huge amount by thinking more carefully philosophically and more carefully mathematically for the merger. On the other hand, with piano, I have this thing which superficially looks like it's totally disconnected, okay? And if it is totally disconnected, then in fact, a case can be made that I'm doing damage to myself because I got a big enough agenda with math and philosophy, and computer science, theoretical computer science is mixed in there, by the way. With those three things, I'm doing serious damage because I'm spending time doing this thing which I might have missed out on something else since I'm getting older.
It seems to me that interdisciplinary work, when it occurs, really falls into a couple of recognizable models. One is borrowing. You borrow something from another discipline, but when you bring it in, it no longer wears either the shape or the significance that it had in the discipline. It instead has been transubstantiated, as it were, into the material for your discipline. And that is why people within disciplines are always extremely unhappy when someone in a neighboring discipline borrows a model or a formulation or a methodology, and then the complaint comes from the originating discipline, but that's not what it means. Now that's wrong. That's not what it means for those who originated it, perhaps, but it is what it means for those who have appropriated it.
I take it you were saying that if you try to take an intellectual resource from one field and use it in the other, ironically, you run into resistance in the field you took it from, as if you might think they'd be flattered, right? And there would be a tribute to the power of their tools. But you're saying you get the opposite reaction. It's always defined as misappropriation.
Yeah, misappropriation. I mean, now we have the category of cultural appropriation, which is a whole other...
Which is a different
yeah.
conference.
But no, it's misappropriation. Look, I've invented a couple of things in my time that have had staying power. One is the phrase interpretive communities. So I invented the phrase interpretive communities back in 75 or 76. Now that has been picked up all over the place and used in ways that seem to me entirely illegitimate. But I also regard as illegitimate my feeling that what everybody else does with this phrase is entirely illegitimate. Because they're working on their problems, I was working on my problems. Mm-hmm. And that's, and within our little worlds, we were doing what we were supposed to do.
Did you originally asked if there was a downside? Was that basically the question?
Yeah.
And I think it's the answer is at first no, and then eventually yes. And I think it's a matter of what your goal is and how far you want to get. Like as you're taking on multiple professions or jobs or whatever you want to call it, you grow in each field. And there is a synergy, and it really can help you get to a very high level. But at some point, like I had 15 years ago, a goal to be the best bridge player in the world and the best poker player in the world. And I was willing to put all the time in the world and all the thought in the world, and I would do anything to make it so that I could do that. And just not publicly, not for art, just because I wanted to know I was the best at those two. And at some point, you run out of energy, and you say, I have to pick. And at that point, it's deflating and now maybe there are people that will get to absolutely the very best, but it is really, really difficult.
I like it best when I actually say I was going to do something. Nobody thought it could be done, especially I didn't think I could do it, and then I did it. That's what I like.
That's something else that I think probably all of us are united on in this room, like including me. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I see a big division here in terms of whether you're internally focused or really focused on your audience or the people around you that are, the act of telling somebody that they can't do something may not be necessarily that spark that it sounds like a lot of people have. It's not about somebody saying that you can't so much as it's about an internal desire to do more or to explore a field. And so I'm just interested to hear more about sort of whether you feel like your work and your desire to do more is driven by this internal force to be the best that you can or to explore something because it's interesting to you, or whether it's more of a, this person said I can't, or it's an audience focused or proving someone wrong type thing.
So I had a change with age about these things. So I recognize what you're talking about up until about age 45 or 50. And then I had this experience of of being elected president of the American Psychological Association. And I met the CEO, and he said, the job of the president is to bring out the best in the people around you. And since then, I've been a gardener. And as you'll see in the next couple of hours,
That's also the job of a dean. Yeah,
well, I grow flowers, and it seems to me much of what I do now is in the service of creating new stuff that other people can flourish about, and sort of doing the foundations of it, but then being happy to give it over to the people who will do it. So it feels to me like a different motivation.
Yeah, when I came out of graduate school, I was so aggressive. That's how I had been trained. But then I started teaching, and that was the thing that turned it around for me. And, a student gave me her paper, and I just started going through, destroying it. I looked up, and there were tears running down her face. And that was such a moment of revelation. It was like, I'm not here to prove how smart I am. I am here to cultivate young minds as best I can. And it just transformed me.
In our educators, and I don't know if any of you resonate with this, in our educators, I say their primary childhood motivation was helping. That's different than, so there's winning, there's curiosity, and there's helping. There's, the drive to, I want to do something someday that'll alleviate suffering in others, Do any of you identify any other motivations I haven't mentioned yet?
I had a sort of hyper reaction to beauty of every kind, natural, ideas, people.
To the inverse as well, like ugliness?
Yeah, I'm very bad. I've had to overcome that. Ugliness really upsets me, and even conceptual ugliness.
Yeah,
There's a tremendous sense of, and then I would have this feeling of, I just want to add to this. I want to make something beautiful. And I didn't care. I never showed it to anybody. There was nobody to show it to. But, I just put it in my desk. And that still is like my big motivation. It's like whatever I'm doing. I want to, add. I want to beautify. I want to just add some beauty and rip out some ugliness.
Well, what I want to do is correct mistakes. Usually made by others. That is, and I've said this often, that I'm here, that is, doing this kind of work because there are a lot of people out there making mistakes, and I want to tell those people what those mistakes are, and I want to correct them.
We are curious as to whether people feel they've had an important idea that was not well received, and they're not happy about that. And it might well have to do with polymathy, right? Maybe there might be a sense in which it would have a better chance of a good reception if we weren't in the context of polymathy, but that's not an absolute prerequisite.
Humans like habitual states. We like what's comfortable. And I feel that any sort of idea or concept or platform that attempts to break apart one that looks like it's been working, there's going to be a rejection. And so for me specifically, and this could also be that as a bit younger than most here, I'm sort of at the beginning stages of this, where I'm introducing a new platform of using the arts to ask scientific, very sound and interesting, complex scientific questions about creativity. And because I'm still at the beginning part of it, the rejection, so to speak, has just been people not wanting to listen precisely because I am a polymath. But I don't enter into the bitterness because I simply see it as just a sign of ignorance. And if I can educate and I can help to educate them in the value and importance of mixing disciplines, then we can go to the next step of look how I do it.
So when you say it's because you're a polymath, you mean the people in the arts are suspicious of you wanting to take it in a scientific direction, and the people in the sciences just can't deal with the...
Yeah, the scientists are literally, oh, that's fluff. And I said, well, you know what? I'm not entering into that discussion because go and learn an instrument or go and practice it, and then we'll talk, is what I say to them. I go, it's not fluff. It's because you just don't understand it. And then I say that to the artists, too. They're like, why are you asking those questions? Just get to the emotion. And I'm like, yeah, okay, I can do the emotion, but I'm also, it's human nature. That's the basics of a lot of scientific questions. And I also tell them, well, go and learn. Go take a psychology class. Go and understand that methodology, and then we can talk. And so that's why it's the issue of ignorance, but also I'm not bitter because it's just maybe they haven't been exposed to that. And And certainly in that kind of issue that came up that Scott was mentioning about that helping other people, that's sort of been, and I'll bring this up later in the educational part, but as an educator, that's part, I've noticed part of my job is educating people to look at other disciplines and to understand the fundamentals that we've been talking about, that we do need fundamentals before we can start breaking rules. And so we kind of have to go back to square one, and that's okay. And I'm in the business of doing that. So that's why I say it's bitter, but it's not bitterness. I'm not there yet, and I think maybe if I keep going, and again, because I'm at the beginning stages, and if I keep getting rejected, well, then maybe it'll become bitterness. But if people are starting to listen, and so I don't know. I think there's an openness, and maybe because I try to talk to people about, I do it like when I approach them, I say, it's okay that you don't know this.
I react to criticism very differently depending on my two fields. I take criticism and philosophy extremely seriously. You put it out there in order to be attacked. That's the way you make progress. You give talks, and you better be prepared to be attacked. If nobody attacks you, they're not interested. And so, so I'm trained to respond to that. And with my novels, it's very different. It's something very personal. Not that I'm writing about myself, but I'm living in an alternate life. I love my characters. And it's very subjective.
Right. That should make it easier to dismiss, shouldn't
yes,
it?
It does, right? In some, yes. But, when it's in a very prominent place, and it means the book's not going to do well, right? And the New York Times book review has a knack for always getting somebody who is just made to not understand what I was up to in my last novel. So it's interesting. I often would get, so many times have gotten the same kind of review, which is over and over again with the novels, which is all her other work was so good. Why does this one suck so much? So it's like, how does this keep
why
happening?
didn't they assign the book you think was so good to you instead of this book?
So that's like, and that I get, that I'll have a negative reaction to that in a way that I never do if I'm criticized philosophically.
In my field, actually, like in bridge, there's a lot of writing and stuff like that, and they cover the big matches, and people are afraid to be critical. It's really annoying how generous they are to professional bridge players. It's like, I understand it's one thing to an amateur, but I wish that they were far more critical, and they kiss people's asses so much. It's ridiculous to me. And, I'd like, come after me, but be right.
Well, when I wrote columns for the Times, and also in some of my essays and books, especially with the Times, where I get anywhere from 400 to 1,200 comments to each piece, and I would guess that in almost any instance, 85 to 95% of them were hostile. Yeah. That would have been the percentage, and in some memorable cases, 100% were hostile. And there would be criticisms which are relevant to this, to our topic here, that he doesn't have a law degree. What is he doing being a visiting professor of law at Yale? He doesn't have a law degree. He's never practiced, et cetera, et cetera. So it's that kind of thing. So those and one time, one of the things that I used to do, some people who deposit comments on in the appropriate place in the New York Times made the mistake, since I don't write these columns anymore, of leaving their phone numbers, and I would call them. Every time.
Every time. Did you read every comment?
Every time. I sometimes wrote columns in response to the comments, but I would call them, and sometimes I would call people who didn't leave the phone number, but who left their address, and it was a small town, So it was Gerald Newberger in, some kind of little town in North Carolina.
So you look them up.
I'd look him up. And I'd say, look, I'm very interested in what you said about X, Y, or Z, and here's what I would say, and so forth and so on. And that worked, because at the end of most of the conversations, they wanted to have dinner or something like that. One woman saw through the ploy immediately and says, I'm not going to get into your trap, and just hung up. So I kind of admired her. But the criticisms were like that. The criticisms would go back to what they thought was a particularly discredited act in my previous life.
So it's actually a two-part question. The one question is if you could just speak in general to the role of practice in developing your expertise above and beyond talent or naturalness. And the second is, are there specific habits of practice?
I think that actually the practice is really fascinating, because I find that when I prepare myself the best, I've done the most boring things to get ready. And it's just like the layup drills in basketball, or just absolutely knowing my notes cold. It's like none of the fun stuff really helps you, in my opinion, get to. You need it and you enjoy it and stuff like that. But to actually prepare, it's just the simple act of making sure you've mastered the basics, and then you feel as if you can perform or write or do. I assume it goes across fields and stuff like that. But it's just absolutely nailing every basic before you can take it outside that box. You want to make the simple simple, so that when the complicated comes up, you have the energy and the interest in doing it, because you're not dragged down by the simple.
How much of this could be perceived by someone else as talent, as opposed to sometimes what it really is?
It's a great question, because people my entire life have felt like everything I do looks so natural and so easy and so everything, but to get to where it really looks easy, there's been so much work put in, and you don't even know when you enjoy you're doing your work and you're thinking about it and you're prepping and stuff like that. So I don't know how much there's certainly natural talent, but to make it look easy, it means you're so prepared.
So talent is a necessary but not sufficient condition for flying off the hands.
Exactly.
There's some people that could never fly off the hands, but
You're right. I think it's absolutely necessary, but not sufficient.
Well, I have a very specific answer to this question, which has to do with what I identified yesterday as my passion, the teaching of writing. And in the teaching of writing, my lesson is extremely simple. Form is everything. And content, as I put it, is vulgar and cheap. There's no end of it. Whereas forms are finite and learnable, much in the way that Steve was discussing. I call this method colloquially the Karate Kid method of learning how to write, which means that you just practice forms independent of content, and that those forms enable you to generate content. Now, of course, those forms will enable different people to generate different levels of content. And that's where the distinction between people with genuine talent and people who are just workmanlike might be made. Without practice in the forms to the point where you never have to think about them, where they're thoroughly internalized, the supposedly grander aspects of the activity will never actually flourish.
There can be deliberate practice where you're intentionally taking feedback from others in real time or not real time. Doesn't always have to be real time, but you're taking the feedback and you're intentionally making little things. But you can also put in the effort and the time without that counting as deliberate practice.
Yeah, I was going to say that I think it's certainly contextual. So this deliberate practice, for let's say in the arts, because I have to be in front of an audience, literally I will dedicate before a full-on performance production let's say for a theatrical production, I need a good 3 months of intense, every day, all day, reading script, recitating it to myself. Then I meet with actors literally a month and a half before the performance opening night. And that is every day, all day, back and forth, just recitation. The moment of creative interpretation, I realize, comes that week before, when everything, again, it goes back to what what Stephen Harvey's been saying with, you need the basics. So once you get past that, then the creative invention, imagination moments happen, where then we'll just focus on the moment, but never really trying to create specific moments so that in the actual performance night, it's open to spontaneity. In the science side, I find myself practice is more of a long-term type of enlightenment of sorts, where I'm working on an experiment, I'm letting that marinate, I start writing, and I'm not practicing per se to practice like words by words or sentences in terms of the way I would do it in the theatrical or film sense, but it's the practice of just having written parts of the paper and then hope to write another paper in like months later. So it's a more long-term, durative type of mini spurts, let's say, of practice to get a more long-term, lengthy practice time.
That's interesting. Erickson, who did that whole analysis of deliberate practice, found that those who were the highest experts, it's not that they just practiced all day. They actually rest was just as important as practice. So they found that they only actually deliberately practiced maybe 2-3 hours a day, and most of the other time was spent, rest, down periods, right?
Yeah.
Oh, just one little point to add, which is, with writing, in addition to what Stanley had spoken about, the immersion in the forms until you don't even have to think about them. One thing that is, before you can even think of being a writer, is that you have to immerse yourself in the best writing that's ever been done and just love it with a passion. And that's practice.
What constructive changes could be made in the world to facilitate the cultivation of polymaths, of people who in some sense transcend skill sets or disciplines, including, by the way, to the extent that we're talking about the educational realm, including not just college, not just higher education, but secondary school, elementary school, whatever. And there are two versions of the questions if you need to put in concrete form. One if you had lots of money and could do some kind of pilot program and see if something works, what would the program be? And then the other one is if you were God and could completely transform the landscape and change everything.
In the educational world, both through academia and through what I do with my company, I do work in the areas of, I've done workshops as young as 3 years old, all the way to a postgraduate to 70-year-olds. So I've done the whole gamut of the age groups and intellectual backgrounds. And one of the things I've done is really, it's a concept of returning to the French salon style of just conversation, food, discussion. I send out readings to people. I connect with certain individuals. We form like an email list and hold these conversations in different cafes. And I used to have it very formalized, but then people just kind of schedules got in the way. And part of why I bring this up is because I wish if I had the money, I could truly formalize this. And I think this was something that came up that I had been talking to Anam, and kind of what Harvey was saying even to Martin, of just this type of roundtable discussion, square table discussions. I mean, that is a very similar concept, and it's a beautiful concept.
If you want to solve this main problem for the main subjects, you're going to have to go to the research level and get this stuff done by philosophically honest presentations of subjects. You're going to have to get this done so that you have some unified, common language presentation of these subjects that would be accessible with people with high intelligence who don't have any special talent for any of these subjects, maybe only a special talent for one of them. Their tolerance for the kind of garbage we teach is not going to be high for anything except maybe one subject. And that's why you don't have polymaths. And there's the solution.
It's not really, it's interesting because I don't think that kids should be taught to be polymaths. I think that is actually a mistake, and I don't think that is a natural progression for them. But from the selfish side and how it's affected my life, what I have taken, and I do think this works, is I've been worked with top young bridge players and have trained them and motivated them and taught them how to play poker. And they were great at bridge. They are great at bridge. And the thing about poker that I'd want them to bring is not only an amazing work ethic, but to think outside of the box and to think, this is what is standard. This is how to describe this poker hand. This is what the books would tell you to do. But there's just so much more, and I'd want them to challenge what is standard and what is correct. And I think that to train polymaths, you have to take somebody from a field that they are already exceptional and motivate them in another field.
If I had unlimited funds, I would, create an institute that brought together people of widely divergent expertise, of talents, and had a place for them to talk to each other that would support them and that would provide community. People who lived off of ideas. I mean, that's the wonderful thing about the academy. Ideas really matter in the academy. But it produces certain kinds of thinkers for the most part.
It's interesting. This is something that I really think would be very helpful to young people. The things that I became very, very good at, or great at, or whatever you'd want to describe it as, I was terrible at. And it almost seemed like it was overnight that I went from terrible to really good. And I had no idea when it shifted, but things just clicked, and that could happen. I mean, you could feel as if everybody's better than you that you're competing against, or that you're in class against, or that you're taking tests against, and that doesn't mean that the next day you're just not going to just have it all crystallize in your head.